I don't know whether we're technically in a recession. I know economists argue over that and they have certain technical definitions. What I can tell you is the economy does not look great right now. Things are slowing down. You're seeing layoffs in many, many sectors of the economy. People are slowing down.
I think we probably are in a recession, and that recession will get worse.
We're at the beginning of the beginning, okay? For all of us that lived through 2000, this was 4 years of sheer hell.
The probabilities say if we're not in a recession right now, we're likely to be in one very soon.
It'll probably be some tough going for, I don't know, a year. Maybe 12 to 18 months is usually the amount of time that it takes for a correction to happen.
That may mean the bottom doesn't happen for another 18 months. So I think we're in for a lot of choppy market action.
Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Chamath Palihapitiya believe everyone has got it completely wrong and are predicting that we are going to see a horrific recession in 2023. You know, when 2 of the top 5 richest men in the world are sounding the alarm bells about the economy, things are about to get seriously bad. In his latest interview, the ex-Amazon CEO warns investors that things are going to get much worse in 2023 and to hope for the best but to prepare for the worst. We will also hear from Tesla CEO and world's richest man Elon Musk, who shares the same sentiment as Bezos. Things are about to get much, much worse. Make sure to stick around to the end of the video, where we will also break down tech billionaire Chamath Palihapitiya's viewpoint that the bottom of this market won't come for another 18 months at least. Also, only a small percentage of my viewers are actually subscribed. If you enjoy finance content, consider subscribing or liking the video. It's free and you can always change your mind.
We are in some tough economic times.
Yeah.
Some people say that perhaps we're already in a recession. Do you think that we're in one?
I don't know whether we're technically in a recession. I know economists argue over that and they have certain technical definitions. What I can tell you is the economy does not look great right now. Things are slowing down. You're seeing layoffs in many, many sectors of the economy. People are slowing down. The probabilities say if we're not in a recession right now, we're likely to be in one very soon. So my advice to people, whether they're small business owners or, is take some risk off the table. If you were going to make a purchase, maybe slow down that purchase a little bit. Keep some dry powder on hand. And wait a bit and see how. Try to reduce some risk in your business or your life.
Well, you tweeted batten down the hatches.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you mean by that?
That's what I mean. Let's say if you're an individual and you're thinking about buying a new, large screen TV, maybe slow that down, keep that cash, see what happens. Same thing with a refrigerator or a new car or whatever. Let's take some risk off the table. If you're a small business, maybe delay some capital purchases. Do you really need that new piece of equipment? Maybe it can wait a little bit. Have some cash on hand. Just a little bit of risk reduction could make the difference for that small business if we do get into even more serious economic problems. So you got to play the probabilities a little bit.
Any idea in terms of what you're hearing or just with your expertise as to how long this recession could last?
I don't think even the most experienced economists in the world can answer that question. It's a very challenging thing to try and estimate. So I think you just have to try and be reasonable about it, take as much risk off the table as you can for yourself. Hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. I'm an optimist. I think the American dream is and will be even more attainable in the future.
So there's Jeff Bezos on why investors should be extremely worried about 2023. But why is his viewpoint so valuable? The reason is because of his position and connections to Amazon, the world's largest distributor of goods to consumers globally. With his access to consumer data and analytics, he would know better than anybody the levels of consumer confidence and spending, which are among the best predictors of economic pain. So if Bezos is worried about what's to come, everyone else should be too. However, Bezos isn't the only person with this viewpoint. Elon Musk echoed the exact same sentiment when he was asked his thoughts on the state of the economy.
How do you assess our current economic situation?
Well, predicting macroeconomics is always difficult, and one should assign probabilities to these things. But ironically, I did last year. People asked me what I think about the economy. I said, well, I think we might enter a recession in approximately spring of 2022.
Called it. Nailed it.
Now the thing is that recessions are not necessarily a bad thing. I've now been through a few of them, and what tends to happen is if you have a boom that goes on for too long, you get misallocation of capital. It starts raining money on fools, basically. It's like any dumb thing gets money, and I'm sure you've seen a few of those. So at some point it gets just out of control, and you just have a misallocation of human capital, where people are doing things that are silly and not useful to their fellow human beings. And then those companies, there needs to be sort of an economic enema, if you will. Eventually the economic enema does its job, it clears out the pipes, if you will.
Yes.
and sort of the bullshit companies go bankrupt, and the ones that are doing useful products are prosperous. But there's certainly a lesson here that if one is making useful product and has a company that makes sense, make sure you're not running things too close to the edge from a capital standpoint, that you've got some capital reserves to last through irrational times. Because in the past, when there's been a recession, it has gone. It's amazing. It's flipped like a light switch. I mean, David, do you remember this from the PayPal, ex-PayPal days, when we raised $100 million in March of 2000. And we had the demand was so high, we had people like VCs like just literally without even a term sheet wiring money into our account.
We'll send the term sheet later.
they literally would like sleuth out our bank account number and wire money in, and we're like, where'd this come from? And it's like, so it was like there was literally fire hosing money in March of 2000, and then in April 2000 the market went into free fall, and it went from raising money was trivial to even good companies could not raise money in a month. So it's just important to bear in mind like that. PayPal almost went bankrupt in 2000. We came close. But thankfully we'd raised that $100 million in March 2000, without which we'd be in game over, basically. And we kind of saw it coming. So it's like we got that the X-Confinity merger done in like 3 weeks and raised $100 million because we were like, we see this coming to an end pretty soon. And then a month later, it was like, a nightmare, basically. Anyway, so it's just important to make sure if you're a healthy company, you got some capital to get through things. And then what's your costs? And if it is a recession, which more likely than not it is a recession, not saying it is, but it probably is, then just watch your cash flow and get to positive cash flow as soon as you can. But I think we probably are in a recession, and that recession will get worse. But these things pass, and then there will be boom times again. So it'll probably be some tough going for, I don't know, a year, maybe 12 to 18 months is usually the amount of time that it takes for a correction to happen. I mean, the obvious reason for inflation is that the government printed a zillion amount of more money than it had, obviously. So it's like the government can't just have issue checks far in excess of revenue without there being inflation. Velocity of money held constant. So unless there's something would change with velocity of money, but it's just if the federal government writes checks, they never bounce. So that is effectively creation of more dollars. And if there are more dollars created than the increase in the goods and services output of the economy, then you have inflation. Again, velocity of money held constant. This is very basic. This is not like super complicated. And if the government could just issue massive amounts of money and have and deficits didn't matter, then why don't we just make the deficit 100 times bigger? Okay, yeah. The answer is you can't, because it will basically turn the dollar into something that is worthless. So. And various countries have tried this experiment multiple times. It's not like, oh, I wonder what happens if this is done.
Yeah.
Have you seen Venezuela? Like the poor people of Venezuela have been just run roughshod by their government. And so obviously you can't simply create money.
So there's Elon echoing the views of Jeff Bezos, something that doesn't happen very often. More economic pain and suffering is coming. Tech billionaire and investor Chamath Palihapitiya has been spookily accurate in his predictions on what's going to play out in markets, and he agrees with both Bezos and Musk. In unpacking the current state of the economy, Palihapitiya warns investors that we probably won't see the bottom of markets until the end of 2023 at the earliest.
The thing that you have to do before you talk about what is happening now, I think it's probably useful to go back, and you have to really start at the end of the great financial crisis. And the reason is there was a bunch of people coming out of the GFC who confused what the US government and some European governments were doing. At the time, there was the risk of a huge financial contagion. And so the US stepped in and the Federal Reserve started to use their balance sheet to buy toxic assets, right? And the ECB did that, and I think Japan did that as well. Anyways, a bunch of banks did it. I mean, a bunch of governments did it. And then there was this body of pseudoscientific economists who coined this thing called modern monetary theory, which basically said, hey, you can keep printing money and introducing it into the economy to smooth things out and to actually drive long-term growth. And it turns out that a bunch of government officials fell for it. And if you fast forward to 2022, so 14 years later, governments around the world had printed something to the tune of about 35 odd trillion dollars of money into the economy that should have never been there. So the thing to remember is we have not necessarily just been obfuscating true supply demand in the last 6 or 8 months when we've been talking about a recession or inflation. We've been actually doing it since 2008. It's just that it's been building up in the system. So one of the things that we have to realize is that all of that money somehow needs to get destroyed in some way, shape, or form if the true economic equilibrium is meant to be found. What is true supply? What is true demand in the absence of government sloshing money around, trying to prop up things that should not be propped up, or buying votes, or all the grifts that these folks have engaged in the last, decade and a half have to get undone. So that's the backdrop. So if you think about taking $30 trillion out of the global economy, you're talking about almost, I think it's 85 trillion is the world GDP. So it's almost half of an entire year's worth of global GDP. It's going to take 3 years probably of the slow, meticulous, running off of money, not reintroducing new money. So it seems like we're at the beginning of something that's going to be long and drawn out. Now that's separate from whether we're in a recession or not. That's just the bear market that we're in, right? And so you have to look at asset prices today as a microcosm of a much larger trend that has to be about fake money pushing asset prices up, and now taking all that fake money out and finding out what the real price of something is. And I just don't think that takes 6 months. So for all the people that were, fingers crossed, hoping that this would be the end of it, Fed raises 75, we're done with this, they're going to raise 75 more. I just think that's not how it's probably going to be. It's going to take, 24, 36 months. That may mean the bottom doesn't happen for another 18 months. So I think we're in for a lot of choppy market action. I think we have to also be sensitive to the fact that the Fed operates on a certain class of data, and that data in the 21st century is pretty pathetic. Nick, you can probably find this, but there was an article, I think it was in the New York Times, that really walked through how CPI is calculated. And it's a bunch of people that work for the government that walk around with iPads, building relationships with local businesses in all these random places all around the country, and asking them to, chit chat for 15 minutes and do these surveys. Now, you would have thought that in 2023 or 2022, what the government would have said to, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, all the payment rails, the banks, and Stripe is, send me a feed in the following structured way so that I can actually have an absolute precise sense of inflation, because inflation really only occurs when a good or a service trades hands for money, right? And you calculate what did that thing trade at the day before and what does it trade for today. So you could get an absolute precise sense of it. Instead, we do this random sampling thing, and it's bad.
Subjective, humans, etc.
So if you read this article, your takeaway will be, oh my God, this is very rickety, and it drives an enormous hammer that we use to try to manage the economy. That's the first thing. I think you need to buckle your seatbelt because the next 3, 4, 5 months of CPI will probably be very, very bad. 7, 8, 9%. Why? There are a handful of components that have gotten completely run away. Number one, the biggest one is rent. And so rent works on a 3-month lag. We're going to reintroduce what the true owner's equivalent rent is into CPI. So we can already forecast that CPI going up. Oil is at $105 a barrel. Russia is basically trying to break the back of Europe by now messing with their nat gas supplies. The German energy minister yesterday said that if that happens, it could be a contagion equivalent to Lehman Brothers with respect to energy. When you play all of these things out, what you have is unfortunately rampant runaway costs that really have no mechanism to get back in check in the absence of some real governmental changes. Our policy on this Ukraine-Russia war, how we intend to sort of work or cooperate or fight with China, all of these things have to get solved. So in the absence of that, prices are going to continue to go up. And so what does the Fed do? How does it throw away what little credibility it has left when there's 8 and 9% inflation prints and saying, we think we're done for right now? You can't do that. So they will overcorrect because there's just going to be so much pressure for them to act. All roads, I think, lead to lower equity prices. And I think what David said astutely is, we've seen the first wave, but now it has to touch all these other areas. For example, we have gotten totally drunk on debt as a country. One of the most obvious places where we've been serving alcohol far too late into the night is in the financing of all these private equity leverage buyouts. Right?
Leverage is dangerous.
These are sketchy companies that are sort of like, teetering on insolvency at times, where private equity comes in, levers up the balance sheet with debt. They price it right to the edge of what's legally allowed or what's financeable, and then they go do it. But that's all assuming the economy continues to grow. And so if all of a sudden you have some recessionary forces or prices go up and earnings don't, you'll have, a contagion in the debt markets. You could have a contagion in the commodity market. So we're dealing with some really tough boundary conditions. We're at the beginning of something that just fundamentally has to take some amount of time to work its way through the system. And so I don't understand why anybody would give up their liquidity in this moment right now. Why would you? Why would I give up $100 million of cash in my bank account? I would not do that right now. Now we have $30 trillion that we have to work through the economy, a recession we have to overcome, a war we need to end, and people all of a sudden assume that 2 or 3 rate hikes and 5 or 6 months of headlines are enough. It's going to take 3 years probably of the slow, meticulous, running off of money, not reintroducing new money. That may mean the bottom doesn't happen for another 18 months. So I think we're in for a lot of choppy market action. I don't understand why anybody would give up their liquidity in this moment right now. Why would you? Why would I give up $100 million of cash in my bank account? I would not do that right now.